time to mess around is over. Playoffs are getting closer and closer with each passing week, so we are cutting this nonsense out of our rosters, and we're going to add some better guys instead. Let's start with Miles Sanders. Cut Miles Sanders.
Get
Miles
him
Sanders,
outta here.
he hasn't done jack squat. Look at the running back usage from last week, and I don't know. I do have to say, maybe this is because Miles Sanders was still working his way back from a shoulder injury, but he was outplayed 45 snaps to 12 snaps by Chuba Hubbard. Yeah. It's not like Chuba Hubbard was this guy that came on the scene and we're like, oh, who is this guy? Yeah. This is interesting. This guy we've seen plenty of and hasn't really been able to have a grasp on that backfield in previous seasons. It's also why they signed Miles Sanders, so it's just weird to me because they gave him a big contract, but now, again, you see the usage. He's not really getting any usage compared to what he was at the beginning of the season, and then you're looking at the production. Week 4, he had 6 points. Week 5, he had 1.2 points, and then he didn't play, had a bye, and then 0 points. He had 0 points last week.
2 carries.
When I say 0, I mean he didn't score 1 point or even a tenth of a point. So this is somebody that I don't want to be rostering anymore. And then when you're looking for guys to be adding, there's a lot of guys, Tyler Higbee, TJ Hawkinson, that are going to take some hits this week from a production standpoint because of their quarterback situation. So who do we add? We add the guy who's been now thrust into the starting position for the Arizona Cardinals. Thrust. And performed very well. 25 points this week, Trey McBride. Trey McBride, very talented prospect, probably the best tight end in last year's class, and he has looked quite good over his last 4 games. 25 points, 6 points, 10 points, and 3 points. But again, this was the first week, I think, without Zach Ertz, if I'm correct. So you saw him get not 1, not 2, but 14 targets, and he had 10 receptions for 95 yards and a touchdown. I don't really care who's playing quarterback for the Cardinals. I know that's kind of an ambiguous thing right now. Because if it's Kyler, I can tell you right now, Kyler Murray not going to be moving or rushing like he was previously the first probably 7 games out of his ACL tear. These mobile quarterbacks that tear the ACLs, they're typically not that mobile until about 7 or 8 games after they've gotten back into the swing of NFL games. So McBride, that's going to give him value pass this week. He's a great pickup, and right now in a landscape where tight ends still continue to be number 1, super volatile, but number 2, few and far between when you're talking about consistent producers, I like Trey McBride. I think he's going to do very well for the rest of the season. You've continued to see his role increase, and now I think is the time to go pick him up and start him in your tight end spot on your fantasy teams.
Yeah, another guy that we're going to cut. We're done with. We're done buying into this guy, buying low or at all. Get rid of DeShaun Watson.
Creepy boy's gone now.
He's still got 64% rostership in leagues, and honestly, I'm surprised it's not less with the performances that he's had of recent in the last month, which are 0-0 and negative 0.8 and 0 points because he hasn't been playing. And then when he does, he looks worse than when he's not playing. So I think you're looking at him. I guess news says that he wasn't ready, according to him, that he wasn't ready to return in week 7. Hopes he can play as soon as possible. But there is also some word that this is a very baseball type injury that usually sidelines players from throwing for about 4 to 6 weeks. So, I mean, by the time we get 4 weeks down the line, we're at the doorstep of the postseason and the playoffs, and it's not even worth rostering DeShaun at that point or trying to pick him up, expecting him to produce at a high level when he hasn't even shown that he can when he's healthy without his rushing upside. So we want you to cut DeShaun Watson. There's really nothing that he's going to offer you in that offense anymore, and go get Baker Mayfield instead. Yeah, it's not a sexy pick. Yeah, it's not like the best thing in the world, but desperate times, desperate measures. And I'll tell you, with 34% roster ownership right now, Baker Mayfield has done pretty well over the last month. 23 points against New Orleans, 17 against Atlanta, and 21 at Buffalo. And this isn't really due to any extra rushing upside or anything like that. He's just throwing the ball so much. And it's because Rachaad White, one, is not a very good running back, and they have Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So, I mean, he's throwing the ball 35 to 40 times a game right now, throwing some touchdowns. Yeah, he throws an interception here and there, but I mean, it's worth it to pick him up if he's scoring that amount of points for you. That's a great replacement for DeShaun Watson, who's just straight up disappointed.
The Falcons' backfield has been nothing less than disappointing all around. Yeah. Because in week 1 you saw and you're like, Tyler Algier, maybe he's something. But then you're like, okay, it's Bijan for sure. But then now it's like, Bijan didn't even play, but then it's like, okay, he's sick. Okay, so we're going to say cut Tyler Algier.
Cut him.
57% rostered still. And you're looking at, he's just so hit and miss. He's got like a floor of like 3 or 4 points. But outside of that, I mean, how often is he going to be in double figures? How often is he flexible? Looking at the last 4 games, 3 points, 14 points. There's the boom game. But again, that's the game where Bijan misses. 5 points, 6 points. So if the guy's not even consistently like getting a floor of 8 points and then getting into double figures like half the time, you're not flexing him. So we're dropping him.
Nope.
And Bijan Robinson was back to playing around 75% of snaps for Atlanta last week after he came back. So that's pretty typical for him. It's been pretty typical since, like the first week that he's been getting about 3/4 of that share. That's probably going to continue. And we have our own questions about Bijan, but for Tyler Algier, he's definitely not a reliable fantasy asset, not one that I want to be going and adding my rosters anymore, so we're getting rid of him. And then we're going to add Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks rostered in 53% of sleeper leagues, and right now, looking at his last 2 games, he's been in double figures, 14.2 points and 15 points. Now, granted, you're looking at the targets, you're not encouraged. He's had 4 targets each of the last 3 games. In the game where he didn't get a touchdown against San Francisco, he only had 2 points. But in the last 2 games, he has managed to get a touchdown. Here's why we're adding him, because right now you're going to have some more bye weeks again next week. Those are picking back up after a week where there were no bye weeks, and because of that, you are going to have to plug flex guys like Brandon Cooks in. He is a good one because they're playing the Philadelphia Eagles, and this is a list of the receiver production against the Philadelphia Eagles this year.
That's nuts.
Only this year.
He's going to be a hot commodity after next week.
I think these are all the guys that have been over 15 points, but look at all the guys over 20.
Yeah.
So for this week in particular, where you're probably going to have some holes in your roster due to bye weeks, due to injuries, due to changing situations with quarterback injuries, Brandon Cooks could actually be a good pickup, and he actually could be worth something if he pops off, which means maybe if you don't feel confident about him rest of the season, you could actually sell him. So we're cutting Tyler Algier. We're going to add Brandon Cooks instead.
Yeah, and another guy that we're going to cut here is going to be Curtis Samuel, who his roster ownership really went up after 3 weeks of scoring touchdowns, and ultimately that's where his production came from. We knew that was going to go down at some point, but he was worth rostering at the time in case he kind of had a nice continued trend there with the touchdowns, but that stops after he plays the Giants and Philadelphia. He gets 6 points respectively in each of those games, and some of it's been attributed to the toe issue he's been struggling with. He was a game-time decision against Philadelphia. Clearly, the last option there, I mean, even Jamison Crowder was producing more than he was and just getting more opportunities. Yeah, it's honestly a way better situation than we ever thought it would be with Sam Howell because he throws the ball so much, but Curtis Samuel is just not reliable enough for the next few weeks for us to be very excited about owning him. And we are going to, some people may not agree with us here, and that's okay, but we are going to say go ahead and add Amari DeMarcado for the next few weeks instead of Curtis Samuel, because even though they're both likely going to be inconsistent and not reliable fantasy assets, I would trust DeMarcado week in and week out as a last second, depth flex option if I had to start one of those guys, just because of the volume that he's been getting the last couple of weeks. You're looking at Seattle. He has 13 carries for 58 yards and gets 5 targets and 4 receptions as well. And then in week 8 against Baltimore, he gets 20 carries. I mean, if either of those games he gets a goal line opportunity and punches one into the end zone, we're looking at a guy who's a really, really nice flex option. And also, I mean, look at his running back usage compared to Keontae Ingram and Damian Williams. Like, it is very superior to all the other guys. Yeah, you're looking at the 2-minute drill plays.
Ingram is the 2-minute back.
Ingram is a 2-minute back, but that's not going to be happening as much as it was against Baltimore because there's not going to be so much garbage time. I mean, they were essentially playing a 2-minute drill offense the entirety of the fourth quarter because they were just trying to come back and score points in garbage time. So you're looking at the next few matchups, playing the Falcons in week 10 on November 12th. James Conner, obviously not going to be back until at least after that matchup. I trust DeMarcado more than Curtis Samuel at the moment.
Yeah, and James Conner, again, that's probably going to be week 10. Maybe the same week Kyler comes back, we're going to see, but I don't think that James Conner will be out very long after when he's able to be activated off of IR. So this is going to be short term, but again, for the next couple of weeks, like you're going to have bye weeks. DeMarcado is clearly getting the early down work, the short yardage work, the third down work. He's only not getting 2-minute drill.
He's clearly the guy there.
He's clearly the guy. So we're very comfortable picking him up. But again, those are some guys, number one, that you should be getting off your roster because it's not worth rostering them anymore. But number two, guys that could have value, even short-term. We're looking at short-term solutions right now because right now it's every week. You keep your eyes on the next week. What can I do to win this week? And then you just keep compounding wins. You get into the playoffs, then you go for it. So those are guys, again, that we're cutting and adding. Do us a huge favor. Drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Really helps our channel and helps spread this video, helps the YouTube algorithm. And also, if you would subscribe, if you would consider subscribing, especially if you play fantasy football, that would be fantastic. We're going to have you here the rest of the season and also into next season, prepping as you get into your drafts. So we appreciate it if you subscribe. And if you head over to flockfantasy.com/domain, that's where all of our exclusives are, including our rest of season rankings. So if you use code domain over there, you get all of our exclusives. Like I said, flockfantasy.com/domain. Appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you later.